All right. Also, thank you so much for joining for the third and final session of Theology to Action, Caring for Creation. This series was put together by the Care for Creation Committee at St. John's Lutheran Church in Sacramento. And the series is dedicated to the memory and legacy of Peter Brostrom, a longtime member of St. John's and a faithful steward. We are so very excited for today's discussion. So I'm going to hand things over to a fellow Care for Creation member, Karen Olson, to introduce our speaker.
Good morning. Thank you, Holly. First, I invite everyone to join me in an opening prayer. And this prayer is taken from our hymnal, the Evangelical Lutheran Worship. In the front section, there are some scriptures and prayers for every occasion of the church year. And the prayer that our committee chose for today is under the stewardship of creation section. So let's pray. Merciful Creator, your hand is open wide to satisfy the needs of every living creature. Make us always thankful for your loving providence and grant that we, remembering the account that we must one day give, be faithful stewards of your good gifts. For Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord. Amen. I'm very pleased and excited to introduce our speaker today, Ms. Phoebe Morad. The topic for today is Lutherans in Action, Caring for Creation. If you've been with us for the other series sessions, you might remember that we started with Lutheran theology to lay the groundwork for our discussions. And then we looked at environmental stewardship in agriculture. And now today, building on these two, we're moving to action. Today, we will explore and discuss what we as individuals and as congregations can do to care for creation. We are very fortunate to have Phoebe as our speaker today because she has extensive experience in operationalizing caring for creation. A theme throughout Phoebe's academic study and work is empowering people of faith to include discussions of the environment as part of our faith conversations. Her work centers on supporting others who also see this work as critical to our mission in caring for one another as God's gifts. Currently, Phoebe is serving as the Executive Director of Lutherans Restoring Creation. Lutherans Restoring Creation is a grassroots movement that promotes care for creation in the ELCA. This forum is a unique opportunity for Lutherans to empower their congregations to live their faith into the world. As Phoebe says, and I love this image, to be proud green sheep, to help care for God's creation. If you remember in last Sunday's gospel, John 10, Jesus said he is our good shepherd. So I think being green sheep is very appropriate. Phoebe is also the coordinator of a brand new certificate program offered at the Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary. This is the Certificate in Climate Justice and Faith. This program is designed to empower individuals and leaders to cultivate moral, spiritual, and practical power for the work of climate justice in communities of faith. So Phoebe, I will turn the microphone over to you now, and thank you so much for sharing with us today opportunities for learning and doing to care for creation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate you spending the time doing that. And you guys can all hear me, right? It's good. Okay, excellent. I will share some slides in a moment. And like I said, I have a number of them, mostly to help keep me on track. But feel free to interject. There's a small enough group. If you have questions for me, feel free. But I know that Holly had asked me right off the bat to just explain kind of how I got here, a little bit of my personal story, because I appreciate being called an expert in operational, I can't even say it, operationalizing. But I don't really consider myself an expert. I consider myself more of a representative of people of faith who want to live out their faith in what they do every day. And I feel like I happen to fall into this position where I had been working at a research organization called Earthwatch Institute. Wow, a long time ago, in 2010, when I was just invited by my pastor. So keep that in mind, all pastors. Even though I had a young toddler, my pastor thought, hey, I think Phoebe's interested in the environment. There's this thing that you can go to that they're doing outside of this, outside of Chicago, in this outdoor ministry camp that has to do with the environment. And I know you tell us to recycle. Would you like to go? And I had a 2-year-old and hadn't slept through the night in 2 years. I was really excited to go anywhere. But it just so happens that I also was really, I had always been interested in the intersection of policy and religion, and wondered why. I had always, at the, growing up, I had heard so much about the Christian right and how much they were involved politically with everything. And I always wondered, why don't I hear the progressive church in policy and action? And I thought that I went to a kind of, I went to church. Here I am in the blue state of Massachusetts, but in a very red town of Hingham. And personally, we had issues trying to get styrofoam out of our coffee hour. Like, I never understood why this was such a big deal. Like, it just cost a few cents more for us to do something different. Why was this such a big deal? So when this was offered to me to find out a little bit more about what the church had to offer for learning about the environment and connecting it with our faith, I jumped in. It wasn't just the full night's sleep that I wanted. But I have to admit that a decade ago, I didn't even know what ELCA stood for. So I have this background really in environmental and policy work. I didn't know all the underpinnings of I just happened to like the church I went to and the pastor who was there. I didn't choose this church. But there I was sitting at this event, and I was overwhelmed with how much really great theological foundation and material, like a lot of what Professor Dayhill shared with you on the first session of this. I had no idea we had all of that foundational work. And it's not like it was hidden, it was there somewhere. But this group of Lutherans that ended up being Lutherans Restoring Creation realized, there were a lot of students of seminary professors that had built up this work that said, okay, this is great stuff that you have for us in seminary, but we need to get it to the people in the pews, because it can't all be on the pastors to figure this out. And there are lots of people that see this as part of church work. How do we get it to them rather than waiting for it to kind of trickle out from the pulpit? So that's kind of my beginning story with Lutherans Restoring Creation. And at the time when I started volunteering with Lutherans Restoring Creation, when I would gather again together with my Earthwatch friends, my science academic friends, I remember being in a circle of them at some barbecue, and I said, so I'm doing this great work with Lutherans Restoring Creation. And they all took a step back physically, because I used the word creation with this gang, and they immediately thought that I was suddenly turning creationist, right? It was really interesting, because here I was at this event that we spent so much time talking about. Use the word creation. It's not political or partisan. It's, in the church world, it's really important to use the word creation. But here I was in this other sect, it was not the right word to use. Again, so this overall too, what this work has given me is really a chance to be proud of the religious group that the religious family I happen to be a part of. And going down the road, since in those past 10 years, I've always been engaged in environmentalism. But if I didn't have my faith and been able to work with all these people that are in this faith community, the despair would have been overwhelming. I probably would have chosen a whole other career path, because I'm a very emotional person, and this is hard stuff to take in all the time if you aren't surrounded in community. And again, I have to admit, I love my church family, my personal church family, but they weren't enough for me in this work. So to be able to join the larger community of Lutherans Restoring Creation and literally have to find people that this is important to has just really been a blessing. So with that said, I will try to screen share, and you all have to tell me if you can see my PowerPoint in a moment. Okay. So you can see Lutherans Restoring Creation? Okay, excellent. So yes, this is one hat that I wear that over the years I was handed the baton. It was Professor David Rhodes who really began Lutherans Restoring Creation and put together an amazing, a bounty of resources. I was handed this website that had like 1,200 pages of like copy and paste theological material, which was beautiful and overwhelming. Um, and so since then, we've been able to put together a kit that's about 15 to 20 pages that we can hand over to a congregation and say, hey, if you want to think about how to turn, how to not just have a green team, however it's going to work in your congregation, how do you hand over an environmental ethic to every one of your typical committees? So, we try to make it as palatable and as collaborative as possible to do our mission by cultivating a community of dedicated stewards. And one key point I just want to point out about Lutherans Restoring Creation, we talked about this a lot as we decided to be our own nonprofit. Do we go under the umbrella of the ELCA or do we stay separate? And we did decide that we wanted to stay separate, which is difficult for a multitude of reasons, but I'm really glad that we did because it's easier to push when you're on the outside, right? So we do, I think we can push a little further. I think as an organization, our board of directors, we're all considering how do we be more prophetic and push a little bit more. But while we work with the ELCA, we are not of the ELCA. So I'll just clarify that we are a grassroots organization. And that's kind of what I mean too, as far as feeling like I'm a representative. So the other hat that I'm wearing is with, hold on, let me see. There we go. So I hope you all see the next slide too. Good. So I'm really excited that I happened to get a call from Cynthia Molabita, who I know Professor Dayhill had mentioned and quoted actually in one of her slides earlier. She called because I'm the head of Lutherans Restoring Creation. She figured that we should know that she's putting together a whole climate justice and faith center at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary. She's always taught this stuff. She's written wonderful books about it. If you haven't read them, I highly suggest them. I mean, I was just starstruck when she first called me because I had read and loved her book. And so I was certainly on board when she talked about, hey, we need a non-degree program to offer people that this is a passion for, that they want to learn more about the theological bridge to know how to bring this work, bring caring for creation into not just the work of the church, but the church working in the community. I was all on board. So after about 20 hours worth of meetings with Lutheran World Federation and with the ELCA's World Hunger Group, we've been able to put together this certificate that's able to offer, I think the biggest asset is the fact that we understand that this is going to be a program for people who can't drop the rest of their lives and go to seminary or, take a particular course. This is for people who have like about an average of 3 hours a week to devote to something on their, in their own time, and then being able to meet asynchronously, chatting with each other. The first group is going to be 25 of us together in cohorts. And when I say us, the other exciting piece is that it's going to be members from the global South and North. So it's a global cohort program where we're going to be able to meet synchronously and asynchronously over the weeks, over a year together. The biggest part that with my other hat, Lutherans Restoring Creation, is that I'm really excited to have a network of people to be able to work with long-term as well. So if you have questions about that, feel free you can start asking me now or later, but I'm sure that you'll be hearing more about the actual center itself from Cynthia. But anyways, I'm just really excited about that. So to backtrack a little bit, and I feel like Professor Dayhill had mentioned this to all of you, but I didn't realize it when I showed up to this camp outside of Chicago that starting in 1993, way back further, there were Lutherans in the 70s. Paul Santmeyer wrote about the connection between our liturgy, our faith, the theological underpinnings being exactly what creation care is all about. And there is a beautiful statement that even though it was written in 1993 is pretty timeless. So it's about 20 pages. I highly suggest reading it because there's a lot in there. But when it comes down to it, having a statement for us to build off of is, I mean, that's the point. These social statements, unfortunately, are often put on a shelf, but it's our job as people in the church to pull them off the shelf and step on them and be able to step up using them. So being able to keep looking back to that social statement is one of the best tools that we have when we end up working with all of these different ELCA ministries. So this is the side of the church that I had no idea even existed. But here we are, all of these different assets for the community within ELCA, and watching them all be able to work together and lift up this work is wonderful. Now that I get to sit at the table in my position, but there are a lot of people who don't. So that, again, I try to be a representative to let the rest of the people in the pews know that these things exist. We're working with them. You know, one piece that maybe some of you have heard of is Blessed Tomorrow, is an organization that they have a lot of great money from the MacArthur Foundation, and they were able to help train, helped us train about 300 Lutherans in how to talk about climate change, kind of without angering people and making it a controversial issue. That was a 4-hour training that 300 people were able to take. 60 of those people decided, hey, I'm willing to take these slides and take them on the road. So again, that's an asset that is not part of the ELCA, but the ELCA partnered with them to help get these people trained. So again, with the seminaries, there is more than just PLTS offering eco-ethics, disaster response. I've been really impressed with, and I'll show you later where you can find some playlists, but disaster response across the globe, Lutherans have been known for showing up and being the first to show up, the last to leave at disasters, right? They're also doing great work in lifting up the intersectionality between all of this. Instead of just attending to the fire, they're trying to get at what's causing the fire, right? So I've been really impressed with their work and some of the experts that they have connecting these issues so that we build a better team. So that's just a quick snapshot of what I get to see with our big institutional church. And again, just to point out the fact that I like this image of a hub, because Lutherans Restoring Creation, we're not developing a lot of new stuff. There's enough out there. It's just that we all need to hear from each other. So we like to think when I show you a glimpse of our website, when there are web professionals that look at our site and they're just overwhelming, it's a library. I like to show people around there because it's a place where we keep things for people to use later. But we really like to, most importantly, connect individuals with each other. The local and institutional contacts, the fact that we know that you're not going to do this work if you don't find a way to put it in context with where you are. So we're really just trying to redirect you to who's in your neighborhood. So this is a snapshot of, again, just understanding that there are lots of different ways that you can integrate this into your life. So when we did have workshops together, one of the pieces that we tried to keep reiterating you have all listened to a couple of these sessions now, and there's a lot on your plate when you think, how do I care for creation? You don't have to do all of it. The idea is you find the instrument that you're going to play. Because if we're all playing the same instrument, it's going to sound awful. And, we need a lot of us doing a lot of different things. So I think too, whenever we get all of the information at once, it's overwhelming and we tend to leave it on the table. I think that's one of the best things we can do for each other, is to help one another find what is your role in this right now. It could be different, in a year. Again, I had mentioned the fact that we try to kind of especially help individuals, again, not take it all on their own, but figure out, how are you going to disperse this to other people in your church? How are you going to find, that one person in worship and music who is willing to open the door to some new, different, innovative ideas? Or how do you bring this up to your volunteer facilities person who really doesn't want one more thing to think about? But how can you work with the stewardship person so that they can come to you and say, yeah, I'll talk to the facilities guy, because they'll know that we'll save X amount of money if we do the programmatic thermostats that you can program. And, I'll tell them how many more meals we can feed people. And that'll get, so to really try to help people think of all the collaborative ways that they can do this. And the reason that I want to lift this up to you all as a very active green team is that an action plan is really important to do, most especially so that you can list off people that are not you, so that it's not even on your team only, that you're the ones making sure you're getting other people involved. So I'll show this off a little bit on our website, but we have a paper version that I don't know if you've been able to look at yet, but as long as you start making some progress in finding ways to be collaborative. Again, too, I'll go through these really quickly because I really want to hear back from you all, but just for some ideas as far as how does this look in church? It sounds like you all are in a community where it's not too hard to help people understand what in the world environmentalism would have to do with the church. But in a lot of communities we work with, they really do need to, they need to find language so that this isn't, you're not in competition with your hunger ministry, with your sanctuary ministry. That this is all connected. We're not trying to draw energy or funds from anybody else's passion. But when we do try to think about how being a Christian is thinking about how you love your neighbors, I bring up a couple images here. I don't know if anybody's seen the visions from Shishmaref, but there is a Lutheran congregation in Alaska in the community of Shishmaref. This picture was taken in 2016. So unfortunately, I think they're only in worse shape now. It's a community that had to leave because of rising sea levels. And we've heard these stories from the Lutheran congregation that is there. So, your fellow Lutheran brothers and sisters in Alaska actually are impacted directly by climate change, even though it seems like such, a political partisan issue to some people. Seeing the impacts sometimes will help see the connections. The other picture I have here are two pastors from Latin America that came and shared with an advocacy group in DC. It was actually great because it was a good deal of bishops in the room that they were speaking to, with the understanding that they were really sharing their stories with the number of migrants. I think it's up to 80% now that are knocking on our doors to come into our country are there because they can't produce their own food anymore because there's been a drought there for over a decade. So to just try to help people bridge the gap that it's not my issue is more important than your issue is to see, how all of these issues intersect and all of our social ministry efforts are compounded by climate change. So I also love to just bring up some really happy faces, and again, pre-COVID, but I have to say a lot of these groups have been meeting and been able to stay in relationship with each other because they already had this connection. But there are a lot of green teams across the country that, again, it's a life fulfilling experience. It's not like, oh, we got to put recycling bins out. That's not what a green team is about. It's about finding strength in one another. You see these people by their apple tree. They decided what their effort was going to be for the next few years was to grow an orchard so that instead of just paying a lot of money to deal with their lawn, they were actually going to use their space to grow fresh fruit that would then be part of their food pantry ministry. There are other groups here that are meeting at their outdoor camp, supporting camps that have been, certainly struggling over the past few years anyways, but this past year even more so. But the fact is, this can be a ministry that that brings in people that otherwise didn't feel connected to church, or as many of my friends didn't necessarily feel like they were at church unless they were outside. So also just to bring some visions too of the fact that, there's one way of being together and being a green team that's a lot about education and being kind of looking inward at what your church can do. And then there's the outward sign of literally putting solar panels on your church. There are all these showing up at marches with your faith on your sleeve. I have this great story from a board member who he admitted he's in New York City, and it was one of the 2014 climate march, you know, that huge one. And he was really struck. He was part of a group that was bringing together Christian communities, and they had a cross. They were ready to do the march with a bunch of them, and he was the one holding the cross. And somebody in the sea of people came running over to him and said, "Why are you here? Why are you anti-pro? Why are you against us?" They just assumed because he had a cross in his hand that he was a counter protester to the climate movement. And so this made him recognize, I have a great deal of work to do just as a person of faith to help people understand that there isn't one side to this, that Christians, unfortunately, the Christian right hijacked the media from, with this communication. And he was able to be there with a host of other people as public witness that, no, we're here as people of faith because this is a big deal. The here and now is what we were given by God to take care of. So yeah, to remember that it's not just about looking inward. And also too, for all of us to remember that church isn't only found, this was harder to think about pre-COVID, but now we're all thinking about how differently we can meet together as church. But this was 4 or 5 years ago, just outside of Chicago, where this is Easter Vigil service happened, fireside vigil happened here. Another few great stories from St. Stephen's Lutheran Church in Chicago, where a farmer's market not only was able to feed community members, but also had community members that were recently out of prison, and being able to, and here were a bunch of grandmas teaching these young guys that were just out of prison how to garden. And you can imagine all of the possibilities there, challenges and possibilities going on there. So, all these different ways to engage and intersect many different missions of your church life. It's all about really knowing and understanding where you are in context, not finding one of these and trying to replicate it, but listening to what your community is needing. And the other big point I just really want to hone in on is not trying to do it all on your own, to really find collaborative partners. And that could mean outside of your church, which could mean, community affiliates knowing more about your church because you're reaching outside. These visions I had, the visuals I added are just like, imagine if every member of your family were to throw in their own ingredients while you're making a stew. That doesn't go well. Or imagine that the entire orchestra is full of the string section. Also, I don't know, not my favorite instrument. But also too, if the point guard is always the one that's always gotten the ball, like, you just have to recognize that when you make space, you will have a stronger team. So I really, you all seem to have enough kind of people at your table to be able to engage in lots of different ways. There are some congregations like mine where my church, I'm head of Lutherans Restoring Creation. I personally, my home church, we don't have a green team. Just don't have enough people that were able to commit to something. So I've brought in people from every other committee to look at what we can do. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, but I might share again to show off the website, but we have like a half hour more. Is that right? Okay. So I want to leave plenty of time, and then maybe that will help me be able to show you what we have on our site.
Wow, thank you, Phoebe. That was fabulous. Those are some really good examples for us to keep in mind, and some really good inspiring ideas. I love the part where you're talking about community and supporting one another. That's always a good reminder. Thank you for that. So we are opening it up. I see that Mark has his hand raised. So Mark, do you want to unmute yourself? Oh, that's a clap. Okay. Yes, there are lots of claps too. Okay. Any questions from the group or comments? I think I can see everybody. In the chat, I put 2 hyperlinks as to Lutherans Restoring Creation, Phoebe's website, and then also to the certificate program at the seminary in Berkeley. And it was interesting for me to hear you say, Phoebe, didn't realize that it was also becoming a center. So not just the certificate program, but also sounds like sort of a hub for
Yes.
informational exchange. And I had one question about, you mentioned that it would be a global cohort with people representing the South and the North. So are you deliberately or selecting people representing these various areas, or are you going to see how the initial applicants fall out, so to speak?
Yeah, we are talking about that a lot right now, that's one of the most exciting reasons why having Lutheran World Federation as part of this. We are already, I'd say about half of our applicants, it just opened up about a couple weeks ago to start receiving applications, and about half of them are from Africa thus far. Because you forget being here that like the average Lutheran is an African woman, when you look at how many. So that is really, really exciting. And yeah, we do make clear on the application that we're excited for everybody who's interested in this program. And we're gonna, try to make the most diverse group so that everybody who is able to participate can hear from a lot of different perspectives, which is gonna have its own unique challenges too. But I think being able to build that kind of network and hear from different perspectives is part of the reason we're doing this. So, and yet to your point too about it being a center, Cynthia Molabita has done this work forever, but she's really great at inviting people to the party, right? So she's also invited to the party organizers. So we have someone that is doing a separate course on faith-based organizing. So that's going to be a separate course as well. The idea long-term too is that it can physically be a hub, which you all might be more interested in, to be able to house more and more events and that sort of thing. But really focused on the concrete action that happens, that yes, you're absorbing information, but then you have to also let that out and see it in the world.
Right. Well, we'll look forward to hearing more about that. We did have Cynthia speak to our committee, our Care for Creation team, about the new certificate program and how we might support that. So that's an ongoing discussion with us.
Yay.
Thank you for that. I just would ask, you mentioned the Blessed Tomorrow. Can you elaborate, like, if there are opportunities going forward how does that work, I guess?
Sure, I will definitely. In fact, I'm gonna try to talk and share my screen. I'm not great at doing both things at the same time, but the Blessed Tomorrow program, we had, they were 4-hour long Zooms, and it all just started with COVID. So I was really surprised. I feel people were hungry to get on something, right? And to be in community. So I was really impressed with how many people came out for that. However, now what they are able to put together is going to be a learning platform that is more based on like a Blackboard type resource, but a collaborative learning platform online. So for now, I think that's going to be coming out by September, so that you can basically run through the same program that we all did throughout this past year, but run through the same program and be able to connect asynchronously. But hold on, I'm going to bring up Blessed Tomorrow. Well, actually, what I'm going to show off first is the first way to get involved with that, especially if you're interested in having people possibly come speak to your group. Go ahead and tell me too, what in particular are you interested in hearing from people that have done the training or taking the training yourself?
Yeah, it sounded like a very interesting resource to learn, even for myself, how to talk to people about climate change.
Right. So definitely if you can connect to our page and make sure you get on our Good Green News. I'm ready to tell everybody about that as soon as they tell me about it.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I would start too by seeing if I just kind of wanted to lift up all the different ways that we're trying to connect people, assets, the human resources in the ELCA with each other. So right now there are 59 Caring for Creation ambassadors who've gone through this program. And you can kind of zoom in on where people are. Again, because during COVID, people didn't have to care where people were on the map. They could just, contact whoever they wanted and do a virtual training. or a virtual presentation, but you can see here and get in touch with the people that you would like to be able to speak with and find their emails and reach out to them. But also too, what I wanted to highlight, because you are a very active church, is when you know of things going on in your community, can you let us know? Because we just want to highlight amazing work. This is twofold. I want people to be able to use each other as resources, because yeah, it's nice to be listed on a site, but if you can call someone and say, how did you get a community garden going on your lawn? How do you get people to even water them? You know, I'm not going to give you that information. Someone who's done it is going to be able to. So we try to actually list off who are the people in your neighborhood or not who have done this and made this successful. So networking, kind of self-service networking is one piece of this map. The other part though is that, you know, when we talk to bishops, to the people in charge, especially in the middle of the country here, where they mostly hear, you know, squeaky wheels get the most attention. The bishops in these areas need to know that great work is going on in their communities, and they might not have heard of it. You know, there are pastoral reports that we all have to send in from a church. There's nothing on there to say that you're doing anything in creation care. We're trying to put something on there. But that's just another reason why we exist, is to say, hey, this is important. And a lot of people are doing great work in this area. So that's another reason for this. And another thing I wanted to just highlight, that I know you all are doing all this work, but I don't think you've submitted a covenant with creation yet. Have you? Have you ever seen this? It's basically, it's especially helpful to those congregations that there's maybe 2 or 3 people on their green team that are really excited about this, but everybody just keeps ushering it to those 2 people that are interested. It's a covenant that you're to bring to your church council to say, hey, as an ELCA church, you know, there are things that we said that we consider important. Do you think as a council, we acknowledge all of these things? It's a way to bring this, and we intentionally did not even use the word climate change in here or anything partisan. I mean, it's all there. It's just not in that language. But we kind of put it on a council to accept the fact that this is part of your vocation as a church. And then when they sign it, that kind of gives, again, one of those stepping stones to be able to look back to, no matter who your council is or whether or not that one person interested in green work at your church, you know, moved. You still have this to go back to, because your church made a covenant that says, yes, these are important to us. And then as Lutherans Restoring Creation, we come back to you with the kit and the way to kind of hand it off to people on those committees. There is a nice little kind of self-serve, it's asked to watch this informational video, which Mark, your colleague from Bethany, right? Didn't you go to Bethany with Noni Strand? Is that right, Mark? You're on mute, Mark.
Did you ask me something? The phone was ringing. I
did.
City about a traffic light that's out.
No, just, I think didn't you go to school with Noni Strand?
No, I went to Bethany College, and her father was like the Bishop of Central State Synod, and I've known her family for connected through Bethany for quite a while.
Yeah, so I knew there was a connection there somewhere.
Yeah. And the Land Institute in Salina and all that stuff. Yeah.
So basically, we had a couple people share a few stories, so to help congregations understand you can do this in many different ways. So it seems like that's kind of why I wanted to put some questions out to you all as a group. I love this way that you're coming together during COVID, but when you do get back together, what's next on your plate? And especially what's next as far as reaching out to the community that you're in? I'm really curious to know what you have in store and what you're excited about doing next.
Phoebe, that's a really good, oh, go ahead, Mark.
No, go ahead and finish your comment.
Okay. Well, our group, the Care for Creation Committee, has looked at some different areas for projects, and Melanie started working on waste disposal and recycling. And we have linked with our facilities folks as far as resuming an audit that they did. So we've touched on these things. They're kind of, I think we're at the place that we might look at them and then see how circumstances have changed and where we want to go from this series. So I had a question. So in your experience in looking at different churches and groups and individuals, have you noticed that there's a sort of a jumping off point or some characteristics that help people or the groups be successful? Like some lessons learned that we might learn from as well?
I do feel like less meetings are better. Have you ever noticed that? Yeah, just not a lot. It just kind of brings everybody down when you just have a lot of meetings. So whenever you can jump into what else your congregation is doing or community, like if there's an Earth Day celebration, get together as a group of church members and go to that. Don't do your own thing. Leverage what other organizations are doing as much as possible. Our group in Central States has done a lot of leveraging one member of their team is really, and they put together a synod-wide team. So if you can plug in with more stuff that your entire area is doing and hear, what other congregations are doing, that helps a great deal. Also to use the assets of your synod office and really be heard and make yourself known there, because then they'll tell you what's going on, but they'll also have in mind, hey, why don't we use that really strong group of people at St. John's and, get them in the mix. So the more collaboration, the better, but collaboration doesn't mean meetings.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, that certainly gets to your ideas of community and support. So Mark, I'll go back to you. Did you have a question, a comment?
Well, and you prompted a comment. I saw after the fact that there was a community cleanup around Earth Day of Morrison Creek, which is an urban watershed here. There are a lot of homeless camps along Morrison Creek, and but it just looked like from the images a really great experience to get out and stay socially distanced and work on the health of that watershed. So last week, I see Karen Ross, the Secretary of Food and Agriculture, is on with us this morning, and she did a great, outstanding job and very deftly and graciously addressed the ruminant issue, animal meat and dairy, and looking at some of the morning political public policy shows and the news of the week, that the culture war is intensifying over meat and taking your hamburger away and all that, and eating meat does have an impact on creation, absolutely. But I'm curious how you have found, because Lutherans are diverse, we're rural, urban, how you've dealt with that issue across the country, particularly in rural America with Lutheran farmers and ranchers. And, if Karen wants to make a comment too, but that has the potential to really kind of blow up in our faces, I think, if the wrong approach or the wrong, attitude is out there.
Well, I'll answer your question, and I'd love to hear from Karen if she's available to talk to this too. But to answer the other question about, is it better to have, task force projects or bring this up during worship? And to your point about, because it is such a big issue, I think to understand your context first is the most important step, to understand your audience. And what I find, just like talking about climate change, I do want to run up to people and grab them by the shoulders in the street and say, our house is on fire. But I know that's not going to go anywhere, and they're just going to think I'm crazy. And because I work in this field and I hear all the information, I forget that everybody's not starting there. Everybody's not starting at point Z where I am. And it's not fair to expect them to catch up with me just because I'm excited about this. So especially with the whole concept of the fact that what we think is fair and right in eating animals isn't something that people have thought about yet, for a lot of people. And if we can start with some other ways about bringing up creation care, Good Shepherd Sunday, and some of these topics in worship, that's a much easier way to start discussion and open people's hearts first without diving into their mind and trying to manipulate their mind. So being able to constantly have it as part of our worship is a way that then your task force can help figure out, okay, what can we do next? How can we talk about this next? And specifically to your question though, about how we talk about this, that's one of the questions that I want to ask our bishop. What is our Bishop Eaton? What is our church? There are some great programs to help with these dialogues. One group called Creature Kind, which is listed on our site, that helps us think about what does it mean to care about the welfare of farmed animals? And what does it mean for the people that work with those animals? How is it part of caring for neighbor? So to bring that language of faith into this very heated dialogue is so helpful, but you need to usher it in and just speak in love and faith. Hi, Karen.
I just wanted to reaffirm what you said. I found whether it's strictly in the policy arena or other places, you have to come to the conversation and recognize everybody's coming from their own place. And we have to start where they are so that they're engaged and want to take the next step and the next step. Otherwise, you never will have trust to be able to take on the really hard. And in this age of very complex issues, it's important to have those diversity of views, but we all have to start. I just love what you said about that, because that's the only way to get civility restored to the public dialogue. That's what I find. And then it makes it easier to explore so many different menu options that you might even want to serve. And it's not about taking things away from people. It's about giving them information for their own choices and to focus on the care for the animals, because the people who do this love their animals. And my veterinarians talk all the time about, they know from the beginning what the purpose of that animal is, and they're going to give it the best care they possibly can for that whole circle of what that animal is for. And that's why they are, when they're hunting, it's not about hunting to hunt, it's about hunting to also feed themselves. And so to learn to respect that when we're so passionate about the care of animals can become a very difficult thing to do, but to understand where they're coming from and their own well-intentioned place as well.
Thank you, Karen. It's really important to, as you reminded us, to be open and listen to people and meet them where they are. And Phoebe, I think during your previous conversations, you addressed some of what Cheryl had a question in the chat about congregational projects versus events. So I think you talked about this, and you mentioned like incorporating care for creation into the service and into our study, so people learn first rather than adding on another activity. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah, and to your point too, Holly, about like how to find them, it is kind of overwhelming about like how to keep track of these things, right? And I'm sure out where you all live too, there's just so much constantly going on. I would suggest Facebook for the most down to earth connection point, just because so many nonprofits can only afford a Facebook page. Also too, there's like Gardener Guild. What I find interesting in my local work here is that trying to think of the literally common ground where you're going to find people that don't necessarily think like you, but animal welfare and gardening seem to be two places where it's nice to find common ground with people, that you don't jump into a confrontational conversation. And again, there's so many people in our Lutheran tradition too that like, we're really passionate, but we're not going to yell. Yelling isn't our thing. Like, we're not going to show up at a march. Not comfortable. Pre-COVID wasn't comfortable with that, but definitely not now. Like, what are the other ways that we actually use our hands and feet to show our passion for this? And yeah, gardening and animals seems to be a great common ground.
And I'll just add voices too. You know, one of the groups that I've been associated with for a long time, and the original Episcopal Power and Light and Reverend Sally Bingham's actually written up in the current Environmental Defense Fund newsletter that came this week. And their lobby days are this week online. So I actually have an appointment on Thursday with Congresswoman Doris Matsui's staff, and I don't know, we'll see. Maybe there's somebody on the team that would like to join me on that. I don't think I'm solo, but I may be the only constituent at this point. And then I also, Karen, you'll appreciate Doug LaMalfa from Northeast California. I have relatives in the district. Those of you that know the Kimmelshoe family, they farm in the district, and they're a delightful place to visit, and they're open to visitors. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah, we need to deepen our advocacy bench a little bit, and it's pretty easy to do. I
And
think.
the fact that advocacy now can be these, you don't have to go anywhere, but you meet via Zoom and learn how to interact. Karen, I don't know if you've experienced that, but it sounds like a really great new venue for people that otherwise didn't feel accessible.
Yeah, we've had more participants in every workshop that we've done. We're doing a lot of work right now on the governor's executive order for 30 by 30 and a natural working lands climate strategy. We did roundtables up and down the state, and we've had more participants than ever because people didn't have to get in a car, drive for 3 hours for a 2-hour meeting, and then 3 hours back home. So it makes so much sense. I see that being incorporated into everything we do going forward, which is good for climate as well, even though it gets tiresome sometimes.
Right. And it lets more voices be heard that otherwise, yeah, with this whole spectrum of society that otherwise didn't have access.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One day.
Fun. I do have a question because I was on council when our committee was getting really started, but I'd love to know what the process is going to be if we're going to do, are we still in the planning process? What's next for ourselves? Do we have a plan yet? We're using this to inform what our plan is going to be.
Good.
Yeah, I think we have had, I know Karen touched on it a little bit. We've been looking at some of what is going on with the properties committee. We have been trying to set up and take some next steps for reintroducing our recycling trash and food waste. I think that we found maybe recycle bins turning into trash cans. And so part of what we're doing is Sarah is helping reach out to the youth and hopefully creating some new signage that we might put up, creating homes for all of the trash and recycling bins, and setting up food waste collection. So that's our current project I think that we have going on. But what we have coming up too, after hearing from everybody, is what our next steps to be introducing advocacy events and things that we can get involved in. That's kind of where my question came from of what is the best way to know what is going on and how can we start presenting that to our congregation and getting involved in some of these other groups that exist and creating those relationships. We are a small group of people that we know are trying to help represent some of what our congregation is interested in, but we also want to present things that are going on around us and kind of start linking up those opportunities. So long story short, we have a small project going on, but we are looking for future opportunities and what we might take on next.
Can I just follow by saying that Holly's, I would say, holding back a little because she's engaging pastoral and other leadership appropriately in terms of how we are organized and the various collaborations that are possible. So I appreciate that sometimes that we don't get too far out in front, but I will just say that Holly and others are leading really well in terms of engaging our congregational leadership at the highest levels as to where we can be going and who we can be going with. So I'll just say that much. And I think we have really great leadership here that is not only effective, but has the most promise of when it's executed that it will be a congregation-wide effort and not, as so often happens in these things, just the efforts of a few. So that's all I wanted to add on to what you said, Holly.
That's great.
So Phoebe, one quick comment I also wanted to add before we need to close out is when you were talking about common ground, gardening and animals, it made me think about also the broader framework that environmental concerns can take. And in Bishop Eaton's letter recently, she touched on this and she said that connecting climate to economic and racial justice is essential. And I think I saw that referenced in your biography too, how climate is connected to so many areas and that people can really find something that we all care about.
And I think again, to that point, that this isn't, we're not arm wrestling over issues and what to spend time on. And sometimes I hear people say, well, climate change is the issue of our time. And as soon as you say it's the issue of our time, that puts it on some kind of hierarchy. And if we keep doing that with each other, we're not going to listen to one another and learn from one another. And that's part of what we need to be in community with each other about. How do we express this while we listen to the needs of our brothers and sisters? It's not fair to guilt somebody about using a disposable mask if that's all they have access to, or if they've been using that mask for 3 weeks because that's all they have. Like all of those things. And again, faith community is the way we need to learn how to be in love with each other, right? And so yeah, while I think words like intersectionality are important, it's hard to live that out in other spaces, but in church is where we get to like look at your prayers every week. That's where they are. It's all right there.
And I think that also lends us to think about communities as resilience, as we're frame it within a positive framework, as we build more justice and address poverty. We can also address, climate change and sustainability within the larger framework of making our communities more resilient.
Yes, yes. And recognizing the privilege that we have and how to use it best.
Okay, any closing thoughts from anyone else?
And I put a lot of links in there, but please do share my email. I don't know if it was on that general information, but please share my email and feel free to ask more questions. And I really enjoyed being with you. And I love that there were a couple of you that had dogs involved as well. Thank you for bringing your dogs.
Well, Phoebe, thank you so much. This has been very inspiring and informational, and we've just really appreciated your time and your enthusiasm and your spirit with us this morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
More great things from your community.
That was really great. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Can I leave?